in case you were wondering, we do have the method or the habit here at Bethany of walking through books of the Bible. So no, I didn't just pick Genesis 34 today because I felt like it. This is the next passage that we come to in our study of Genesis. And because we have this method of walking through Scripture, we're forced to deal with texts that sometimes we would rather skip over. And several weeks ago, Ginny came to me after the morning service and said something to the effect of, "You've got a really tough chapter of Genesis coming up." She reminded me that back in 2015, our very own John Herb preached on this passage, and Ginny just so happened to have her notes from that sermon, which she gave to me and were a help to me. Thank you, John and Ginny. They were a help to me in my own study this week. I was tempted to just play John's sermon for you, but you can go back to our YouTube page and look up September 13th, 2015. You can find that sermon and be blessed by that another time. In the opening comments, I will say this. In John's opening comments to his message back then in 2015, John said that when we read Genesis 34, we begin with rape and end with mass murder, and I think it's fair to say that in between we don't read anything that is especially good. And I totally agree with that sentiment, that summary. And because of this fact, before we really dive into the passage itself, I want to briefly think about the big picture question here of Genesis 34. Why is it that this passage is even in the Bible to begin with? And I can think of at least 3 reasons that I'll just summarize briefly. The first reason being that the Bible always tells true stories. The Bible is not a fairy tale that tells about life the way we wish it would be. The Bible talks about how life actually is in a broken and fallen world. And so we get stories like this. The Bible doesn't just cherry pick nice things from Jacob's life and tell us, here's some examples for you to follow. Sometimes the Bible sets up examples for us to not follow, for us to avoid, some cautionary tales. Another reason here is that narratively, in the overarching story of Jacob's journeys, this chapter here sets up the need for him and his family to travel on to Bethel, the place where he had initially encountered God when he was on his way out of Canaan, out of the promised land. When he was fleeing from his brother, God met him when he was using a pillow for a stone for a pillow, other way around. God met him, appeared to him, and made him these promises at Bethel, place called no, Bethel's not face of God, is it? House of God. There we go. Goodness. The other place was called face of God. So it sets up the need for Jacob to travel back to that place, and then eventually from there on to Hebron, the place of his father's settlement, where it seems Jacob finally settles. And then the last reason, and I think the most important reason, the thing that we're going to kind of dive into a little bit here today, is that this passage, did I hit the wrong? Oh yeah, I was going to show you a map. So he's up here in Shechem. He just crossed over the river on his way, and he's gonna eventually need to travel back down to Bethel, and then eventually to Hebron. But they're kind of stuck in Shechem right now. Okay, that's why I was going to have that up there. Last but not least, this passage highlights the ongoing brokenness of Jacob's family. When we left off in chapter 33, it kind of had a little bit of that fairy tale ending, right? Where it was like, okay, Jacob and Esau are reunited. They're on good terms again. Then they part ways. Esau goes back down to his place in Seir, and Jacob is now in the promised land, and he builds an altar to the Lord, and he's worshiping the Lord. And it's like, okay, this is it. And you're ready to hear, and they lived happily ever after. However, that's not the truth of the story. It's not the truth of the matter. Jacob is still broken in certain ways. His family is still broken, and the promises of God still require God's divine, miraculous, sovereign intervention in order to come true. And this is an important thing for us to notice because it's the same thing that's true in our lives, right? None of us have arrived. None of us, even though you may be a believer in Jesus Christ and you've experienced the forgiveness that has been offered by Jesus' blood, this free gift of salvation, you have hope of eternal life, and you have purpose for living. You have a life to live that's lived for God, and it's like, even in that position, you haven't arrived yet, this side of eternity. We still struggle with sin issues. We still struggle with injustices where others act out their sin upon us and cause pain and heartache and issues in our lives. Christians are not immune from the kinds of things that are described even here in Genesis 34. And so it's important that we don't just leave the story in Genesis 33 and say, and they lived happily ever after. It's important that we dig in and say, what does God have to say to us here? God is going to work through these circumstances. And God's work is going to be done even in spite of Jacob's family's brokenness. So this is in many ways a precautionary tale. There are many things we can learn from the negative examples in this chapter, but I want us to focus on what I see as the primary focal point that the narrator is looking at in writing this account. I think we're meant to see and learn from those broken responses to injustice that we see in Jacob and his sons. A great injustice is enacted against them, against their family, and we learn something in the way that they respond to that. It's a given that we have experienced, or we will experience, injustices in this life, either against us or against those we care about. Some of you here today, I'm confident in a group this size, even without knowing all your past, I'm confident that some of you here today have even been the victim of the same injustice that Dinah was. And our passage today forces us to think about the responses that we have to those injustices. I think this passage cautions us to be wary of two wrong responses to injustice. Selfish indifference, as if it doesn't affect me, I'm not going to be worried about it, or sinful vengeance, an overreaction in the other direction. Let's walk through the passage together. The first thing we see here is this terrible injustice met out against Dinah. Genesis 34 says, "Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land." The first thing is that Dinah goes out. She leaves the relative security and protection of their family camp, and she's going to town to see some of the others. We don't know if she had friends in town or if she was just curious to see what life was like in this pagan society. Some interpreters throughout the years have tried to discern, is there something wrong or sinful in Dinah's actions here? You know, whenever we come across a difficult passage, we want to assign blame, right? Like, okay, who's the bad guy here? Who's the good guy? You know, who's to blame here? And we can make some real mistakes in doing that, especially in a passage like this where, quite frankly, I was reading one of the commentaries was basically saying there really are no good guys in Genesis 34. It's like they're all bad guys to one extent or another. Everybody's a bad guy here. Except perhaps Dinah. We don't really know her motivation there. Some interpreters have said, she's a wayward child and she's playing with fire, she's out there, getting involved in the things of the world. The great reformer Martin Luther took a much more charitable approach, perhaps. He just said that she just had childish curiosity. And so she's going out to see what's going on in the nearby city. How do they live there? What's life like? One thing is clear, she's in a vulnerable position. Because especially in this society, women are kind of fair game, so to speak, in the cultural thinking. And so she's not under the protection of her parents in the camp. Her brothers are out in the field. She's not in their protection either. She's alone. She's vulnerable. And Shechem, the prince of that town, his dad is the king. He's the one in charge. Shechem, the prince, takes advantage of that vulnerability, and he rapes her. It says there, when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. The language used here makes it pretty clear. He seized her and humiliated her. These words are the same words used to describe Amnon's actions in 2 Samuel 13. The son of David, King David, he does the same thing. He seizes and humiliates, quote unquote, his half-sister. But then Shechem says, well, now I want to marry her. It says his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. Some confusing stuff here. If you really love someone, are you going to treat them that way? I don't know what kind of love it's really describing here. I do know that this whole idea of speaking tenderly to her after just abusing her is actually fairly normal behavior for abusers. It's a cycle of, abuse and then, don't worry, I'll never do it again, that kind of thing. Perhaps some of you have experienced that vicious cycle. Perhaps some of you are in that cycle right now. I urge you to talk to somebody who you can trust. Talk to me. You need help. Shechem determines to marry her, and he tells his father, get me this girl for my wife. And those first 4 verses set up all the story to come. In the conversations to come, we're going to learn some important things about Jacob and his sons, and also about the pagans that they're dealing with, these Hivites from the town. And throughout the whole account, we're going to see the brokenness in each group. We see 2 telling conversations. One conversation between Shechem and his father and Dinah's brothers and their father Jacob. That's the first conversation we see. And in this conversation, we get a picture of the deceitfulness of Jacob's sons. It says there in verse 5, Jacob heard that Shechem, had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with the livestock in the field, and so Jacob held his peace until they came. This is kind of setting up the context of their conversation. Jacob is strangely silent here. In fact, we're not going to hear a word from Jacob until the very end, where he's not speaking up to defend his daughter's honor or to speak hard truth to the man that violated her. He's not speaking up to give voice to justice. He's speaking up to his sons and saying, look at all the trouble you made for me. complaining about his own issues, inconvenience, danger to himself, whatever. I'm getting ahead of myself. But Jacob is strangely silent here. Shechem and his dad are coming to negotiate the marriage. It says Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him, verse 6. And then in verse 7, the sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. The Bible is crystal clear on the wrongness of Shechem's actions. Let's make sure we understand that. When we talk about the wrongness of Jacob's actions or his son's actions, we're not excusing the wrongness of Shechem's actions. Jacob's sons have absolutely the right response, the right gut reaction to what happened. Indignation, anger. Anger is not in and of itself a sinful emotion. God himself gets angry. Jesus got angry. You remember when he saw the money changers in the temple courts where the Gentiles were supposed to be worshiping? And Jesus got a whip and he went and drove all the animals out and he turned over the tables. He said, this is supposed to be a house of prayer. Anger in and of itself is not a wrong, a sinful feeling, emotion. There is such a thing as righteous anger, and I'm guessing that Dinah's brothers, Jacob's sons, are feeling that here. Shechem had done an outrageous thing. And in this conversation, the king and his son present a proposal, as you would do in that kind of society where marriages are largely arranged, right? We saw that in the case of Isaac and Rebekah, and then also with Jacob and his two wives, Leah and Rachel. There's this sort of bargaining kind of thing for the bride price. Hamor spoke with them, verse 8, it says, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give us your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. Notice no mention of what Shechem already did. It's just, hey, let's make a treaty. Let's bring our families together. There's nothing wrong here. And then he says, verse 10, you shall dwell with us and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it and get property in it. So he's kind of presenting this as a win-win, right? Like, hey, if you intermarry with us and if you let my son marry your daughter, then we can have trade relations and you'll get richer, you can have more land, all this kind of stuff. Who could turn down such an offer? And then Shechem, the son, speaks up, the rapist speaks up as well, and he says, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price and gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. He's like, how many zeros do I have to write on this check? Tell me whatever you want. I'll do literally anything if I could just have her as my wife. Again, no mention of what he already did. And the key thing that we're meant to notice in this exchange is verse 13. This is a key verse. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They answered him deceitfully. We've heard this word before, haven't we? In reading about Abraham's life, reading about Isaac's life, reading about Jacob's life, especially Jacob's life. This theme of deceit continues to carry on through this family. The brothers are just doing what their father and grandfather and great-grandfather had done before them. They're deceiving others. And in one sense, we might be tempted to say, first of all, well, yeah, more power to them. I mean, if somebody deserved being deceived, it's this guy, Shechem, the one who had defiled their sister. Who can blame them? But what's the nature of their deceit? They say to him, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. And if we hadn't been clued in just in verse 13 that this was a deception tactic, then their instructions here would actually sound good and right to a normal Jewish reader. You know, the first audience reading this account or hearing this account, that would have sounded right. They're not supposed to intermarry with the other nations. Later on in Israel's history, God told them, don't do that. We find that in the book of Deuteronomy. And so this seems like this is good, this is right. You're telling them, actually what you need to do is you need to take this sign of the covenant to become one of us. Enter into this covenant relationship with God. And then we can have this intermarriage and this family connection. But therein lies the great scandal, the great issue with their deceit. That they're using the covenant relationship with God, signified by circumcision, they're using that as a tactic to be able to destroy their enemies. They're using circumcision in order to deceive rather than to bless. The sign of circumcision was supposed to be a sign of blessing, that these people are entering into this covenant with God, that they would be blessed and be a blessing to others. And instead, they're turning it around and making it a curse upon Shechem and his father and all the men of their town. All of you guys. They're saying deceitfully, hey, don't worry. It's all good. We'll intermarry with you guys. Just get circumcised first, all your men. Well, the second conversation then begins in verse 18, where it says, their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do this thing because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. And so then it says he was the most honored in his father's house. So they, father and son, go to the gate of their city, and they spoke to the men of their city. And this is where we get the second conversation, where we see these gullible Hivites. The gate of the city was a place where business was conducted. You might remember that from the story of Ruth, where Boaz, her kinsman redeemer, went to the gate of the city and spoke with the other close relative, and they conducted business there in the gate of the city. This was a normal thing. And so Shechem and his father Hamor come to the gate of their city, and they spoke to the men of their city, and they say, these men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it. Behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives and give them our daughters. And only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us and become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are. And then they have to kind of sweeten the deal some more. You know, that's a hard pill to swallow, right? Like, we all have to be circumcised. Well, okay, but just remember verse 23. Will not their livestock and their property and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. Do you see the way that even Shechem and his father, there's no mention of their deceiving, Jacob and his sons in their conversation with them. They seem pretty open and honest, like, hey, this is what we want. We want to take your daughter's hand in marriage, and please be a part of our community. But now when they speak to their own countrymen, there's no mention of Shechem's desire to marry Dinah. There's no mention of the impetus behind this. They present it as a win-win to Jacob and his sons, and they also present it as a win-win to their own people. They're saying, will not all of their stuff be ours? They told Jacob and his sons that they would grow in wealth and get more land, but now they're telling their own people, yeah, well, we're going to have all their stuff. It's all going to be ours. Like I said, nobody's really a good guy here in the story. They're saying kind of the opposite of what they told to Jacob and his sons in some of the details. They're definitely not vilified in their conversation here. There's no mention of their deceptive nature, like when it says the sons of Jacob answered deceitfully. But they're definitely not the good guys. And one of the instances, or one of the proofs that we get of that, is the fact that they're still holding Dinah at this point, almost like holding her captive. We're going to find out later on that Jacob's sons actually took her from Shechem's house. So with these important conversations over, all the Hivite men agree. It says, all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised. All who went out of the gate of his city. Two important conversations. One that shows us the sort of on the surface deceitfulness of Jacob's sons and Jacob's own shocking silence. Another conversation which shows the sort of perhaps implied deceitfulness of Shechem and his father, and the gullible nature of these Hivites who just assume, okay, there's nothing wrong here, let's just go for it. It's a win-win. And this opens the way for the part of the story that would have been, I think, the most scandalous to its original audience. Now, we might be surprised to hear that, but honestly, for the Israelite people reading this story, I think they would have been more scandalized by verses 25 to 29 than even the first 4 verses, talking about Dinah being abused in the way that she was. What happens in verses 25 to 29? On the third day, when they were sore, they, meaning all the men of the town, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. What we see here in verses 25 to 29 is a terrible revenge. First thing to note is that Simeon and Levi become mass murderers here. They came upon the city. Some translations use the term the unsuspecting city. This translation says that the city, while it felt secure, the point being, everybody in the city assumes, because of the conversation that Hamor and Shechem had with Jacob and his sons, primarily his sons, they assume we're safe. Where it's okay, we can afford to be without our warriors, to have our warriors hampered for a while, because we just made this peace treaty with this large camp of people that are going to become a part of us. And they're camped out on our border, and so they're going to be able to protect us. And instead of providing protection, what do the guys from that camp provide? Death. Mass killing. The two brothers, Simeon and Levi, take their swords and they come against the city while it felt secure, while it was unsuspecting, and they killed all the males. It does say in the next verse, they killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. And that verse we might say, okay, that's justified, right? We might feel that way. But the part that ought to be shocking to us is this isn't just a life for a life. This is all the city, all the men of the city. These guys, Simeon and Levi, are following in their father's footsteps, but only kind of. They're following in his footsteps in terms of their deception, but where does the deception lead? Well, let me ask the question the other way around. Abraham deceived Pharaoh and Abimelech, right? Said, she's not my wife, she's my sister. Kind of a half-truth. And how did that end? With a peace treaty and separation. Both times. Isaac deceives Abimelech again. How does that end? Peace treaty, separation. Jacob deceives his father and he deceives his brother and he steals his brother's birthright and his blessing and everything. And how does that end? Actually, reconciliation between Jacob and Esau, right? That's what we talked about last week. This surprising reconciliation between them. So yes, there has been deception handed down throughout the family, but not deception that ends in mass murder. And so we see kind of a ramping up of the sin. It's not like the same, it's the same and more so, adding sin upon sin. And the fact that Dinah was a direct sister to Simeon and Levi, they shared the same mother and father in this family, does help to sort of explain their actions, but it doesn't excuse them. Nowhere does the text say, and this was all okay, because, after all, she was their sister. It's not an excuse. It does help us to understand where they're coming from, but it's not an excuse for their actions. And one of the ways that we can be clued into that is the fact that Dinah had other direct brothers as well, Reuben and Judah. Where were they in this whole thing? If Simeon and Levi were doing a good and right thing, then why weren't all the brothers involved in it? Later Israelite law in Deuteronomy chapter 22 would require that a man who raped an unbetrothed girl would have to marry her and provide for her. It was a way of providing, because women in that culture, in that time period, a woman's livelihood, her ability to survive, depended on being provided for. And so they're saying, if you take a woman like that, you can't just divorce her. You can't just abuse her and then leave her. You actually have to provide for her. It said he's not allowed to divorce her the rest of her days. Seems really harsh to us, but in that context, it was a way of providing for her. And even in the case of a betrothed woman, the man who raped her was supposed to be put to death. But only the man. It said only the man who raped her shall be put to death. Simeon and Levi weren't following those rules or any rules. But it's not just them that are at fault here. All the rest of their brothers become plunderers as well. It says in verse 27, the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. It switches, it kind of zeroes in on there were two sons that did all this killing, but then it kind of uses that broader language again in verse 29. The sons of Jacob, and I think there's good reason to believe this is all the rest of the brothers join in at this point. Verse 27. They came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, but not just their wealth, also all their little ones and all their wives and all that was in the houses they captured and plundered. So talk about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? This is going well above and beyond. This is a terrible revenge enacted out on the city. And after the brothers enact their terrible revenge and the dust begins to settle, we get one more conversation which shows us some of the heart attitudes and the motivations going on here. There's this telling conversation between Jacob and his sons. It says there in verse 30, then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have defended your sister's honor. You have pursued justice, albeit in the wrong way. Is that what he says? You have brought trouble on me. Think about how your actions impact me. Who's not being mentioned here? Dinah. You've brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. Who's Jacob thinking about? Himself, his own safety. You could argue, okay, well, he's worried about his whole household. He does mention his whole household. But most of the references there are me, I. Look at what you did. Jacob is only worried about himself. It's very telling that this is the first time in the chapter Jacob seems upset. I mentioned already how King David's son raped his half-sister. In that passage in 2 Samuel 13, it specifically mentions how when David heard of it, he was very angry. That's the right response, right? None of that here from Jacob. It says, when Jacob heard of it, verse 5, he kept quiet because his sons were still in the field. Now he's angry, but what's he angry about? His own safety. Simeon and Levi, on the other hand, give this very kind of ambiguous answer. Should he treat our sister like a prostitute? I think what we're seeing here is a sign of unrepentance in them. This is not them standing up for truth and justice. This is them failing to see the seriousness of the way they responded to the injustice. They seem convinced that they didn't do anything wrong. And they don't care that the promises of God are in jeopardy again. The promises of God are in jeopardy again. And it's not because of their great faith, it's because of their great violence. There's now this danger from the people around them that they might come and attack them as a family. And that's often what revenge does. It kicks off a domino effect of back and forth revenge that never ends. This is a rough passage, and we're running out of time. I want us to notice three things that we need to take away from this precautionary account. There are three cautions that this thing gives us, this passage gives us. The first caution being a reminder that this world is not our friend. Obviously, physical danger isn't the only, the physical danger that Dinah was in when she went out into the world without any protection. That physical danger isn't the only kind of danger that we experience, right? But it is still real. So kids and vulnerable people need protectors in their lives. People that are not going to be silent back at camp like Jacob was when his daughter was off unprotected. I'm not saying that kids, you can never leave the house or anything. But parents need to be protecting your kids, providing limits, boundaries, setting limits. That's a healthy thing. Jesus told his disciples to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves as he was sending them out. Because this world is not your friend. It's not trying to make your life better. The prince of this world, you know what he's trying to do? Steal, kill, and destroy. That's what Jesus said. In the book of Ephesians, we're told that we are in a spiritual battle that requires the full armor of God. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18. Are we clothing ourselves? Are we putting on that full armor of God, recognizing that there are temptations, there are distractions, there is one who desires to seek and kill and destroy, who's going to be speaking into our lives as we go about our day? That's the first precaution I think we need to take away from this. The second one is that we need to watch out for self-centered complacency. We see this in Jacob. Are we like Jacob, more concerned with our own safety and our own standing in society than about the injustices that are carried out against powerless people around us? Or are we like Jesus, who drove those money changers out of the temple courts so that the Gentiles could worship? Somebody who actually cared about the marginalized people that the rest of society turned a blind eye to. We've heard numerous stories, even in the past few years, of Christian organizations covering up or turning a blind eye to abuses, as if the ministry was more important than the truth. This cannot be among people that call themselves followers of Jesus Christ. We cannot protect an institution at the expense of the lives of people who are being abused, mistreated, whatever the situation is. What's more important? Keeping my life from getting too messy, or standing up for the powerless around me, being a voice for those who have no voice? We got to watch out for self-centered complacency when we hear stories of injustice, when we see evidences of it around us. But then on the other side, on the flip side of that coin, we need to watch out for the overcorrection, so to speak. Anger and indignation at injustice are good, but that doesn't mean that revenge is. Dinah's brothers had the right gut reaction, but the actions that they took were wrong. Jesus displayed righteous anger at injustice, but he also was the one that hung on the cross praying, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." He didn't take revenge. You've heard the saying, 2 wrongs don't make a right. The way the Bible puts it is this way: "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord.'" That's Romans 12:19, quoting from Deuteronomy. Do we leave room for the wrath of God, for him to repay the injustices perpetrated on us? Maybe you've been hurt badly. I do want you to come and talk to me. I want you to let me help you find the help that you need to process through your trauma in a safe environment. But I can promise you this, that holding on to bitterness and anger toward your abuser, leaving your thoughts and emotions unaddressed, just burying it and trying to move on, even plotting or imagining some kind of revenge, will not bring you the freedom and the peace that you're longing for. And so let us seek to avoid the two wrong ends of the spectrum. Either trying to stay complacent and treat it like it doesn't exist, injustice doesn't exist, or on the other hand, plotting revenge as if we don't have a judge of the universe that we look to who says, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." Much more that probably should be said, but I can't. May God enable us to properly grieve the injustices in our lives without falling into sinful underreaction or overreaction. Let me pray for us. Lord, I feel more than normal the need for your Spirit's work in my heart, in my words. I pray that you would help us to forget or ignore anything that I've said that is not helpful, not of you, not speaking the truth of your word. Lord, and I pray that your voice would speak loud and clear through your word. I pray that you would enable us to have Christ-like reactions and actions in response to the injustices that take place around us or even toward us. Give us wisdom, Lord, in addressing these things in a godly way. Help us, Lord, to learn from the negative examples that we see here in Genesis 34. I pray for your grace in these things. In Jesus' name, amen.